Hey there, and welcome. I'm Anna Hartman, and this is Unreal Results, a podcast where I help you get better outcomes and gain the confidence that you can help anyone, even the most complex cases. Join me as I teach about the influence of the visceral organs and the nervous system on movement, pain, and injuries, all while shifting the paradigm of what whole body assessment and treatment really looks like. I'm glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Unreal Results podcast. For this little movement snack, it's not a movement snack, it's podcast snack. We're talking about the bronchus and mainly the bronchus, the trachea, the bronchi, the tubes of our breathing apparatus, and maybe touching a little bit on the pleura of the lungs and the mediastinum, to sort of like bring it all practical and functional. So the reason I want to talk about this is shout out Julie Areola, my favorite massage therapist here in San Diego, and one of the certified LTAP providers. She requested for these podcast snacks to each episode be a quick on one specific organ and all the things. And so I'm like, yeah, sure, that'll be easy. No, I don't know if this is going to be easy, but I'm going to try. And of course, what I do for every podcast when I want to share information on the anatomy, I go back to the books and I read and look at pictures, and as if I need more information in my head, I gather more information. And really, it's more to be like, am I missing anything? Is there anything else to say? And is there a better way to assimilate this all together? So I just read the chapter on the thoracic cavity in the original visceral manipulation book. I'll have Joe link that in the show notes. I think you can buy those on Amazon, but it's going to be cheaper and easier to just go directly to the Barral Institute than using Amazon for those. But anyways, why I want to talk about the bronchus is because the last few patients I've had, it's come up a lot. Oftentimes the right bronchus will come up when there's been a history of allergies or asthma. I see it a lot during the springtime. I will say here in San Diego, we are having, actually even in Annapolis, when I was in Annapolis for the month of May, we're having a late spring. And so I'm like, maybe that's why I'm seeing these things now, because really when spring started in March, I didn't see as many of these the body directing me into this area as I have in past years. So I'm starting to see this now. A lot of right bronchus and lung. I have a whole podcast episode on that called Right Shoulder Pain and Left Sciatica, I believe is the podcast. I'll have Joe link that in the show notes too. But anyway, so I'm wondering if that's sort of like why I'm seeing all this right bronchus things. Just because we're having a little bit of a late spring. So with that said, let's talk about the bronchus. So the bronchus are the large tubes that come off the trachea. Trachea obviously is what connects our nose and our mouth to our airway. They are large tubes. They have cartilage rings from the whole way down from your neck, your mouth, neck, all the way into the tubes that go into the different lobes of the lung. A little to orient yourself. So it comes straight down and slightly to the right of midline, typically on people. And then it bifurcates at the sternomanubrial junction. The sternomanubrial junction is the junction between the manubrium and the sternum. It's sometimes called the angle of Louis. It's right at the second rib Posterior, that would be at the level of T4, T5, so thoracic fourth or fifth vertebrae. So at that spot, it bifurcates into the right bronchus and the left bronchus. The right bronchus is more vertical, has a more oblique angle as it goes down into the right lobes of the lung. And that tube goes, as it goes inferior, it goes from being more anterior to more posterior. So the end of the tube is more posterior, then the beginning of the tube is more anterior. And then on the left bronchus has a flatter angle because it needs to allow for the room for the heart. And actually, it's pretty flat, and the some of the tubes of the heart go right over the top of it. So it is actually the longer tube, but it is not as oblique, and it still goes from anterior to posterior as it descends. So there is definitely 3D-ness to this. I love treating the bronchus in a more three-dimensional way. I'll do it laying on the table, but the benefit of doing treatment on the bronchus lying on the table is you have the table acting as some hands for you. So the pressure from the backside of the table, in your mind's eye, you're just wanting to find some 3D-ness. If I don't have them lying on the table, I love to have them in in a seated position, so I can have one hand anterior and one hand posterior, finding that tube and stretching it from a 3D that way. You've heard me say many times on the podcast, if it's a tube, it loves to be stretched. So most of the time when we're doing treatment in this area, we're stretching the tubes away from each other. So anterior to posterior, superior to inferior on the lines of those oblique angles. So on the right, it's going to be more vertical. On the left, it's going to be a little bit more horizontal. And then we're going this way. Three-dimensional from that bifurcation point. Bifurcation points tend to be very powerful spots for treatments as well. So that sternocleidomanubrium junction is going to be a really powerful spot to treat too. Which brings us back to the mediastinum. The mediastinum is interesting. It is one of my favorite treatment things to do on people and to give out to people, and it makes a huge difference for the whole body. And this is probably like the gem I learned from reading the chapter this morning, or today, is on the thoracic cavity in the visceral manipulation book, is the way the ligamentous system works in the mediastinum. It holds the lungs, like that connects the lungs together, that maintains the space for the pericardium in relationship to the diaphragm is very important, because the old way of thinking, but there's this thought process of when we take an inhalation, our diaphragm drops down. That's what changes the pressure on the visceral organs and brings the air in, which is not wrong. But in the area of the mediastinum, it actually is a fixation, like a fixed point that maintains what they call phrenic center. And it maintains the center of where the diaphragm is to maintain the space and maintain the structure of the mediastinum, more than likely for the heart. And so, why am I sharing this? Why is this like so profound? Because the mobility of the diaphragm is dependent then on the mediastinum being able to function really well and maintain that phrenic center for the function of the visceral organs. So if you're dealing with diaphragm stiffness, diaphragm stiffness, or you're wanting to improve people's three-dimensional breathing, diaphragm function, diaphragm as a postural stabilizer, whatever reason you're focusing on the diaphragm. And we talk about that a lot in an episode I'll have Joe link in the show notes. I did not too long ago all about the diaphragm. But you better be addressing the mediastinum. And the mediastinum is that space where the tubes live in the pericardium lives. So tubes meaning trachea, bronchioles, pulmonary arteries and veins, aorta, vena cava, um, esophagus, all of those tubes. That lives in the mediastinum. It is a very high payoff spot for all treatments. And so often, if I'm working on someone that has any sort of visceral, I hate using the word restriction, but any sort of like visceral disinformation leading to pain or osteoarticular issues or musculoskeletal stuff or movement patterns, whatever it may be, we want to restore the curve of the thoracic spine because that is intimately the same as making the mediastinum happy. So, that sternomanubrium junction, that's a really important spot to do. That means going back to the relationship on the spine, that area of T4 to T5, really between T1 and T6, I would say, is the sweet spot. If you're not looking for and addressing normal mobility at the intervertebral discs, the costovertebral joints, the costotransverse joints, in this area, you're missing a huge piece in treating the whole body, treating the diaphragm, treating the neck, treating the upper extremity, affecting the tubes of the bronchus, which is the whole reason I started this talk. So it really needs to be addressed. And on that note, not only understanding how powerful the mediastinum is maintaining the space and mobility of the diaphragm. And whenever we maintain mobility of the diaphragm, this means that we're also optimizing mobility of, and therefore motility of, the lungs, in the heart, in the pericardium. But we're also affecting the whole body. And the cool thing is, too, when you look at even the bronchus, the trachea, the related spinal segments, right, the viscerosomatic reflexes are going to be between T2 and T5. So you should be checking those areas anyways as a way to improve the information to these visceral structures or from these visceral structures to the spinal cord and the brain itself. So it's also one of those things, and I've talked about this a lot, whenever I've talked about the thoracic cavity or any organs that live within the thoracic cavity, because they are in such a hard frame, it is really important to do treatment on that container if we want to affect the contents. This idea of the relationship between contents and container, I talk about a lot inside the LTAP Level 1 course, inside the mentorship, just when I'm working with people. We always have to look at the whole body. It's almost like looking at the body as structure and function, is like container and contents. How can we affect the container, and how affecting the container would affect the contents? And then how can we affect the contents, and how does what's going on with the contents then affect the container? It is like a very symbiotic, integrated relationship. Therefore, we can choose treatment techniques to affect either and have an effect on both, which is what opens up so many opportunities for you, especially if you're not trained in visceral manipulation. If you're a physical therapist or an athletic trainer, you probably know how to affect the hard container, the joints of the thoracic spine, the joints or the ribs, the relationships of the ribs to the intercostals, right? So that's something that we should be checking. And on that too, one of the places that we can really palpate these visceral organs that are in the thorax that we're talking about, the lungs, the pleura, the lungs, the pleura, and the bronchioles, is in the neck. The pleural dome comes, the fascia, the like fibrous fascial container that connects the pleural dome, the sac that the lungs live inside, attaches to the first rib, and the cervical spine at C6 and C7, as well as the scalenes. So that means all the way to C2, the entire bulk of the scalenes can affect the viscera. This is why probably a lot of people end up wanting to work on people's scalenes. But taking a step back and maybe addressing the mediastinal space first, or the tubes within the thorax first, or at least that posterior mediastinal space, you might find that the scalene sort of melt, because again, they're the muscle, and even though those ligaments attach to it, if they're going to be tight, it's often from a reflexive reason. Okay. So the other thing to think about too is just affecting the trachea and the fascia in the neck. I'm not a big like, let's go to the neck, but if I'm going to go to the neck, it's going to be in a very specific way, affecting the cervical fascia to affect the cranium or affect the thorax. And so Jill Miller's neck anu, the quarters ball, and neck gnar with the yoga tune-up balls, those are two correctives that I think are really high bang for your buck, especially if you don't know visceral manipulation, to affect the entire container of the neck and the pleural dome, especially when you pair that with mediastinum and stretching in the bronchus. So I'll make sure, I think I have videos of all of that. I'll make sure that Joe links it in the show notes for you. But man, treating this area of the body is so powerful. So powerful. I even too have a video somewhere I'll find for you all of stretching the hyoid bone. The hyoid bone connects the mid-cervical fascia, which extends down into our mediastinum and into our clavicular pectoral fascia, but it is a way to affect the trachea because the backside of the mid-cervical fascia attaches to the prevertebral fascia, which is the fascia that is around the trachea. So that is another way that we can affect it. So root of tongue massage, hyoid stretch, these are all really great ways to affect these structures in the upper thoracic cavity. When you really start learning the anatomy and you're seeing how everything connects, it really is like, I have so many tools to treat it. I don't know, like, and when I'm talking about so many tools, like, I'm not even talking about a lot of visceral manipulation, but like, it's just like, you should feel excited about how to treat this area. So, and like I said, this has been coming up a lot. Anything for people that have foot pain, to back pain, to neck pain, to thoracic outlet symptoms. Like, it's been kind of across the board. The most traditional referral for bronchus, lungs in general is going to be shoulder pain, neck pain, upper back pain. So, but remember, just because there's a somatic referral doesn't mean there's always going to be that relationship. And then also remember, the way our body organizes itself around these areas of protection or proprioceptive disinformation changes our dynamic alignment. And that's why, like, so many of my athletes come in with foot pain and I treat their lung and then their foot feels better. There's not a direct viscerosomatic reason for that, but there's definitely a biomechanical one of when we change our dynamic alignment around a different structure, right? And this occurs in the lungs quite a bit. So, happy lung exploration. See you next time.